Welcome to one of the best chess openings to crush opponents rated under 1500. Let's jump right in. We're talking about the Scotch Gambit, an aggressive opening where you immediately pressure the center pawn, and you're also setting up a powerful push to chase away the knight and launch an attack. That's why your opponents will almost always capture the pawn on d4, expecting you to recapture immediately. But here comes the first surprise. You don't take the pawn back. Instead, you play bishop to c4, prioritizing rapid development over material. You can always recover that pawn later if you want to, but for now, your goal is to quickly develop your pieces and begin putting pressure on your opponent. In this position, most players will continue with standard development, usually bringing out a knight or bishop. The most common move is knight to f6, attacking your central pawn, but this is not a problem. As soon as they develop that knight, you can push your pawn forward and chase it away. What makes the Scotch Gambit so effective is that your opponent really needs to know the theory well in order to survive the opening. They can't just rely on standard developing moves and hope for a solid position. That strategy simply doesn't work against the Scotch Gambit. In fact, here's a quick spoiler. In this position, the only good move for black that really keeps them in the game is the unexpected counterattack with pawn to d5. It's a counterintuitive move, but without it, black can quickly fall behind. But here's the thing. Beginner to intermediate level players are almost never aware of this counterblow idea with pawn to d5. And even if they are, it's still difficult to handle. So let's go through the more natural moves that beginner players typically make. Now, the knight has to move somewhere. Retreating it all the way back to g8 is way too passive, so most players avoid that. If they play knight to e4, it looks aggressive, but it's actually quite risky. Your pawn on e5 already controls many important squares, cutting off the knight's escape routes. Later, you can easily target this knight with your bishop or your rook down the e-file. So even though knight to e4 looks bold, it's not really effective. The most common move at this level is knight to g4. They're aiming for a double attack on your pawn on e5, hoping to gain time and finish developing. But here comes another nasty surprise. Against strong players, you might simply castle and build your attack. But let's face it, strong players rarely play knight to g4. So against beginners, unleash the killer move. Bishop takes f7. After black captures, play knight to g5 with check, opening a discovered attack on their knight. You'll win your piece back and expose their king. If the king retreats to g8, don't rush to recapture. Instead, play queen to f3, a stronger move that keeps up the pressure and sets up a deadly attack. I really love this move. It keeps the pressure on, aligns your queen with the knight and the f-file, and keeps your opponent completely on the back foot. At this point, your opponent will likely notice that you're threatening queen to f7, a move that resembles the classic scholar's mate. They'll usually try to stop this threat by defending the f7 square in some way. But here's the tricky part. You actually have a second hidden idea, queen to d5 with check. This creates a powerful left hook that most opponents completely overlook. And even if they do spot the idea, finding the correct defense is extremely difficult. For example, if black plays knight takes e5 or any move that tries to cover the f7 square, you simply unleash your hidden threat, a queen to d5, delivering check and attacking the knight or worse. In many lines, this sequence leads directly to a forced win. You've essentially checkmated them, or left them hopeless, within just 10 moves. Now, the second most common move black plays here is developing their dark-squared bishop, usually trying to protect their extra pawn in the center. But you respond by attacking that pawn again. If black does nothing special, you'll win the pawn and even pressure their bishop. However, if they play a seemingly natural move and capture your pawn on c3, that's already a game. Losing blunder. Think about that. Black plays all logical, normal moves, and yet they're completely lost after this. Why? Because it all circles back to that devastating idea. Bishop takes f7. It's a recurring tactical theme in many sharp openings, especially gambits. The f7 square is the weakest point in black's position early in the game. So once again, after bishop takes f7 and king captures, you play queen to d5. This move delivers a deadly double attack, checking the king and attacking the bishop at the same time, and just like that, the game slips out of your opponent's hands. The idea here is very similar to the earlier variation. You want to recover your sacrificed piece while also exposing black's king. This makes it much easier for you to launch a powerful attack afterward. Once the king retreats, you could take the bishop immediately, but it's actually more precise to insert a check with queen to h5 first. This forces black to push the g-pawn to g6, weakening their kingside even further. Now, you recapture the bishop, but the key point is that you've provoked a weakening move. The long dark square diagonal is now open, and it will become a vital pathway for your attack. For example, the pawn on c3 is now hanging, and you're likely going to capture it with your knight. If black responds by grabbing the pawn on b2, that actually plays into your hands. You recapture with your bishop, and now you're threatening the rook on h8. And here's where the earlier g6 move really hurts them. Because the pawn is no longer on g7, it no longer defends that diagonal. So your queen directly targets the rook, and their king is still exposed in the center. Even worse for black, capturing on b2 only helps you develop your light-squared bishop with tempo. So instead of gaining anything, black just accelerates your initiative. Even if they try to avoid this and play a quiet move to finish development, it doesn't solve their main problem, the exposed king. On top of that, there's pressure building on the e-file and a looming central pawn break. Your plan is straightforward: push the pawn to a5, crack open the center, and launch a decisive attack on the king. Even if black tries to defend, for example, with queen to e7, you can simply bring your rook to e1, reinforce your control of the center, and then play e5. In fact, your position is so dominant here that you can even consider temporarily sacrificing a knight to break through. Next, you bring your rook to e1, building up even more pressure. Now everything in black's position is overpinned. On your next turn, you're ready to capture the knight, and from there, start attacking the king and queen simultaneously. Most of the time, this leads to a win in just a few more moves. Now let's look at the third most commonly played move by black in this position: pawn to h6. At first glance, this move makes sense. You've just developed your bishop to c4, aiming at the f7 square, and black assumes you may be planning knight to g5, setting up a possible fried liver style attack. So they play pawn to h6 to stop that idea and control the g5 square. It's a reasonable defensive move, but it comes with a huge drawback. Black is wasting time. Instead of developing their pieces, they're making a pawn move that doesn't contribute to their position. And in a sharp opening like the Scotch Gambit, that single tempo can cost them the game. This gives you the green light to speed up your attack. One powerful idea here is to play pawn to c3, offering a gambit. If black accepts and captures the pawn on c3, you don't even need to recapture immediately. Instead, you simply castle kingside. Now you've entered a position that resembles the Danish Gambit, but with a twist. It's even stronger. Why? Because black wasted a move with h6, and that gives you a lead in development and a faster attack. From here, your plan is clear: rapid development, open lines, and unrelenting pressure. And in most cases, your opponent won't be able to withstand it. If black does nothing after you castle, you can simply recapture the pawn. But if they take on c3, you now have two powerful bishops and a huge lead in development. If they try to develop their knight, it fails due to your central break with pawn to a5, chasing the knight around. If they play pawn to d6 to control e5, that's your signal to break open the center. Bring your rook to e1, then push the central pawn and open the e-file. Your plan is simple. Use your lead in development to attack quickly. You can also play queen to b3 to form a battery against the f7 pawn and pressure the diagonal. If black tries to pin your knight, you can often ignore it and still break the center open. Even if they capture in the center, hoping to block you, sacrifice your queen. After they take it, bishop to b5, check follows, and your attack crashes through. In many lines, knight takes c6 ends the game, as there are just too many threats for black to handle. If instead they try to avoid this by moving the king to a7, then there is a fancy double check checkmate.